I'm going to talk today about the work that we have been doing in Montreal and most recently in Toronto about the artificial pancreas. And as you know, we are not the only group actually in the world. There are maybe 10, 15 groups actually working in this area. Some focusing on the single hormone artificial pancreas, some focusing on the dual hormone artificial pancreas. We have been doing really the two. So the concept of the artificial pancreas is very simple. So we have three components: continuous glucose monitoring systems, and we have an insulin pump, and in the future maybe we have a pump that delivers insulin and glucagon, and we have a control algorithm, which is basically the brain of the system, and it decides how much insulin and glucagon to give to keep a glucose level in the target range. Now, the idea is very simple. I mean, if the pancreas is not working, you go and you develop an artificial pancreas. So the idea has been there for a long time, and I know this picture was just shown. I think this is actually, it's not a pump. I think it was an artificial pancreas. I think they were giving insulin and glucagon. But what really didn't allow us to go with the development is that we lacked the technology to measure the glucose level in a continuous manner. So it's really the development of continuous glucose sensors that triggered, again, the interest to development of the artificial pancreas. So this is how the interest started maybe 10 or 15 years ago. We have two configurations. One of them is a single hormone artificial pancreas, which it gives only insulin, and it's really as simple because we have the CGM, we have the pump, and all what we need is a control algorithm that combines the two. And the other configuration, which is a dual hormone artificial pancreas that gives insulin and glucagon. Now, the dual hormone system has more potential to reduce hypoglycemia. I will show you now some numbers, but it's also associated with an increased cost and device complexity. So we really need always to weight the two. Is the improvement in glucose control justify the increase of the device complexity or not? And this is a complicated question. So, is it an autopilot? You can think of the artificial pancreas as developing an autopilot for an airplane, but I would argue it's actually harder than developing an autopilot. And the reason is that we have big variability between patients. So you need to have one control algorithm that would work for all patients. You don't have a control algorithm for each patient. You develop one, you put it in the pump, and different people will buy it. So it's like having to develop an autopilot that works for all kinds of planes. And not only this, so because patients change over time, they eat, they do exercises, so just imagine you have an autopilot where the plane while flying, you have different types of disturbances. So from engineering perspective, it's actually harder than developing an autopilot. So we did one study in 2012, and we published it in 2013, where we compared a dual hormone artificial pancreas against a conventional pump therapy. So we had 15 adults. They came for 15 hours to our clinical research facility, and they came twice, and they did exactly the same in each visit. They had a meal, they did exercise, and they stayed overnight. And one time their sugar level was controlled with the dual hormone artificial pancreas, and one time we just let them control their sugar level as they normally do at home. So they had their insulin pump, and they had a meter. Now, when you compare the two, if you see the percentage of time spent in target range with the conventional therapy, the average was 57%. And the percentage of time spent in hypoglycemia, so below 4 millimole per liter, was 10%. So imagine, so these people, all of them are insulin pump, they are highly motivated, and then they spend almost half of the time outside of the target range. Now, with the closed-loop system, or with the dual hormone artificial pancreas, the percentage of time in target, it became 71%. So you can see we have significant improvement, but we are not yet at 100%. But the biggest improvement, where we saw it in the percentage of time in hypoglycemia. So we somehow eliminated all hypoglycemia with the dual hormone artificial pancreas. Now, when we wanted to publish this paper, one of the reviewers came and he asked us a question, which we didn't have an answer. He said, well, if you have a single hormone artificial pancreas, will the percentage of time in target range will be 1%? This means that you really don't need glucagon because you have, you already have a huge improvement with a single hormone system, so maybe glucagon is useless. Or 6%, which means that the glucagon is bringing a significant improvement. And we couldn't really answer that question with that study. So we went on and we did another study. And we compared the three systems. So we had conventional pump therapy, single hormone artificial pancreas, and dual hormone artificial pancreas. We had 20 adults, 10 teenagers. Each one of them came 3 times to our clinical research facility. They spent 24 hours. One time their sugar level was controlled with the single hormone system, one time with the dual hormone system, and one time they controlled it themselves. They did exactly the same. So they had 3 meals, they had a snack, they had 1 hour of exercise on a treadmill, and they had 2 hours of social activities, and they spent the night. Now, if you look at the percentage of time spent in hypoglycemia, with the conventional therapy was on average 3.2 hours per day. So on average, people spend 3 hours of the time below target range, so in hypoglycemia. Now, with a single hormone artificial pancreas, it went down to 45 minutes. So you can see there's a huge, significant improvement that comes only with closing the loop without adding glucagon. And with glucagon, we reduce this number to 21 minutes. Now, so you can see it, you can either say the single hormone system had already brought significant improvement, we don't need the glucagon, but you can also say that the dual hormone system halved the time spent in hypoglycemia. So it depends how you want to see this. Now, this is just a sample test, just to show you how it happens. So the red line is the sensor measurement. The black line is the actual glucose level, so the plasma glucose level. The blue line is the insulin delivery. Now you see, for example, in the morning, between 8 and 10 in the morning, sugar level went up after the meal, but then the blue line, which is the insulin delivery, increased. So the algorithm gave more insulin to reduce the glucose level. If you look somewhere around 4:30 in the afternoon, you can see this green vertical line. These are glucagon microboluses. And the amount of glucagon that we give is very, very small. So on average, each bolus is 1 unit, which is 1% of the dose that is needed to treat severe hypoglycemia. So we really use very tiny amount of glucagon. And you can see that in the afternoon, 4 p.m., glucose level was dropping for hypoglycemia, and then the algorithm gave 3 microboluses, and then you prevented hypoglycemia. And you can see, for example, in the early night hours, so somewhere around 10 or 11, sugar level was high, and the algorithm had to give insulin. So this is just an example. This is one of the good tests. We have actually bad tests, so we don't, not all our patients are like this. We have some patients who we had difficulties controlling, but on average, we improved compared to conventional pump therapy. We went on to do a camp study. So Camp Coronis in Montreal, actually it's outside Montreal, it's in Saint-Agathe. So we had 33 pediatrics. The youngest was 9 years old, and the eldest was 17 years old. And each one of them, he did 9 night tests. So 3 of the nights, they had the dual hormone artificial pancreas controlling their sugar. 3 nights, the single hormone artificial pancreas controlling their sugar, and 3 nights with conventional pump therapy. And they were randomized. So some of them, they would do the single hormones and the dual hormones in open loop, and then some of them will do different order. So just to show you the percentage of time spent in target range. So we defined the target range as 4 to 8 millimole per liter. So it's a tight range. And with the conventional pump therapy, on average, people spend around 30 or 33% of the time in target range. So you can see it's very little time in target range. With a single hormone artificial pancreas, we increased the percentage of time in target range to around 55%. But then if you look at the dual hormone system, we actually had more improvement toward around 65%. And I repeat, you can look at this from 2 different angles. So you could say, with the dual hormone system, we doubled the amount that we spend in target range compared to conventional pump therapy. But you can also say, well, we are really still far away from 100%. So you can see it from different angles. Now, the way you define the target range also changes the results. So if you want to define the percentage of time in target range instead of 4 to 8 millimole per liter, and you want to look at it 4 to 10 millimole per liter, the dual hormone system, for example, the time in target range became 83%. So again, depends how you define your target range, and you see different numbers. So the idea, we are developing the algorithm so that the patient don't need to do carb counting. I mean, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this concept. So the patient, they need to do carb counting for every single meal. It's extremely hard. We did studies in our center. We find that people on average make a mistake of 20 grams per meal. So 20 grams is around 1 or 1.5 unit millimole, 1.5 unit extra or less insulin. So it might lead to 2 or 3 millimole difference. So an extremely hard thing to do. So the idea is that with the artificial pancreas, we remove the need to do carbohydrate counting, but you still need to do some sort of categorization. So we envision it as the patient will look at the pump and they'll say, well, I'm eating now, and the meal is either small, medium, or large. So we simplify the carbohydrate counting. Now, there are different groups who try to completely eliminate the need of carbohydrate counting, but it didn't really work. And the reason is that insulin is very slow. So if you eat a 100-gram meal, and then within 20 minutes your sugar went up by 4 or 5 millimole per liter, then you give a little bit of insulin, you don't really know it is 100 gram, and then after maybe 1 hour, sugar level is at 15, you give a little bit more insulin. So because of the insulin delay or delay in insulin absorption, it's really very hard, we believe, with current insulin to completely remove the need of carbohydrate counting. But we are currently have this strategy. We tested it in a few clinical trials. And what we have shown is that we are removing the need of carbohydrate counting without degrading glucose control, which is very important, because we could actually remove the need of carbohydrate counting now. You just tell the patient, don't do carb counting, just give fixed boluses, but then you have poor control, so this is not the idea. For the exercise, now through that, I'm an engineer, but I spend a lot of time in clinic with patients, and a lot of them, they keep telling me that, well, we do exercise because we want to lose weight, but then we have a lot of hypoglycemia, so we need to eat a lot of sugar. So it just doesn't work together, just go in the opposite directions. So what we envision is that with the dual hormone system, again, you announce the exercise to the system, and the system starts giving glucagon and prevent hypoglycemia without the need for snacking. And I will not show here some numbers, but we are doing now some studies where we compare a dual hormone system and a single hormone system in 2 different types of exercises. So we have a regular exercise, we have an interval exercise, and we announce the exercise to the system 20 minutes before the start of the exercise. So just before they start, they announce it, and we have shown that it actually prevented most of hypoglycemias by continuously giving glucagon during the exercise. So this is how we envision system would be, and this is how we are testing it currently. So I just showed 2 or 3 studies, but actually have been doing more than this. So we have the first study where compared conventional pump therapy with dual hormone system, and then we had a series of studies where we compared the 3 systems together, open loop or the conventional pump therapy, single hormone system, and dual hormone system. And we believe that the 3-way comparison is extremely important. We really need to understand or to quantify the additional benefits that glucagon brings. Because we know glucagon might bring benefits, but how much this benefit compares to simply closing the loop without the need of glucagon. So we have done studies. We started by doing inpatient studies. Currently, we're moving to outpatient studies. So we're doing, our longest study so far has been 60-hour studies, so 2 days and a half at patients' home. We're also doing studies in subpopulations. So we believe that glucagon might be more beneficial for some patients than others. So maybe patients with hypoglycemia unawareness might benefit from glucagon more compared to other people. So we start to tackle some subpopulations in type 1 diabetes to see the benefits of glucagon. And we are doing some meal studies basically just to see if we can alleviate the need of carbohydrate counting. Our plan for the next 4 or 5 years to do more studies. So we need to move to long-term studies. So studies where people try the devices for 3 or 6 months. And then we could look at more important endpoints. So we could look at the reduction of severe hypoglycemia. Does the single hormone system reduce severe hypoglycemia? Does the glucagon actually reduce severe hypoglycemia compared to a single hormone system? So all these important questions that we need to answer. And the only way to do it is by doing long-term studies. We need to see the effect of the artificial pancreas on HbA1c, and again, we need long-term studies for this. And importantly, we need actually to show the safety of a glucagon dosages. So we don't really know if you give someone glucagon every day for 6 months or 1 year, is there any side effects for this? So we really need to show this. So this is our plan for the next 5 years. We need to look at psychosocial outcomes. So we need to see how the artificial pancreas system affects people's quality of life, maybe eating habits. So people maybe, if you remove the need of carbohydrate counting, they will tend to eat different type of food. Maybe they have more freedom to eat more sugar. The activity level. So we know now there are some studies showing that the strongest factor that prevents people with type 1 diabetes from doing exercise is actually fear of hypoglycemia. So if you have a dual hormone system or a single hormone system, this might induce some behavioral changes. So we'd like to measure them systematically. So we do structured interviews and questionnaires. So actually this picture, so this is one of the participants who did with us the CAMP study, and she was interviewed on CTV. And they asked her, what do you think of the system? And I still remember I was outside the tent, but listening to her interview. And she didn't talk about no hypoglycemia, good glucose control. The only thing she said in French, beaucoup de catheters, like too many catheters. And I remember, like at night, I went home, and while I'm in the camp, so actually I went to the chalet. And before I sleep, I was thinking about it. Like we researchers were like too focused on like glucose control, reduce hypoglycemia, improved like time in target. But the patients sometimes they don't see things the way we see it. Like for them, sometimes they could compromise a little bit of glucose control just to have less pain or device which is more simpler or better quality of life. So we really need to not only be focused on HbA1c hypoglycemia, we need as well to accommodate other needs of the patients, because after all, it's them who will choose to use the system. And we know, for example, now, we all know that sensors are useful for patients with type 1 diabetes, but also we know that teenagers, not all of them, they wear it. So we might actually end up having the same situation. We develop an artificial pancreas system that does a wonderful job, but people don't wear it because they just don't like it. So it's important as well we look at these things. So it's really her answer somehow switched our thinking in the lab, and every time we discuss future studies, we just talk about her again, and we need to make sure that we as well don't have too many catheters and simple system and so on. We need to do engineering development. I will show you now a little bit about this. So we have done an AP network, so it's in Quebec and in Ontario. So we have 9 centers. So for our long outpatient studies, we plan to do them in multi-center trials across Canada. So in Toronto here, you can see Bruce Perkins, I guess. Some of you are familiar with him. Now, for the developments, currently we use 2 pumps. So Medtronic has been supporting us from day one, actually, in our research program. So they've been providing us with pumps and sensors. But if we decide to develop a dual hormone system, I mean, I don't envision people really using 2 pumps. So we need to have a different alternative. So something maybe like this. Now, these are just prototypes. If you Google, you can see these pictures. To my knowledge, are not developed yet. But we really need to have some development for a dual chamber pumps before we can bring this to the patients. We have had media coverage, mostly Canadian media coverage. And definitely, I'm not the only one. This is some of the pictures. I didn't have time to put the picture of everyone on the team. And of course, the support of all the organizations. Thank you. Yes, please.
On the glucagon, what is the, I know that right now, as Derek mentioned, that it can't stay mixed. What's the length of time the current glucagon that you're using stays mixed?
Yeah, we do 24 hours. So every 24 hours, we have a new glucagon. And we run into a problem because the glucagon kit is 1 milligram, so it's 100 units. So once you constitute it, you cannot really constitute half of it. But we don't use 1 milligram per day. So we use actually around maybe 30% of it. So every day we throw away. But there are companies, there are actually now 3 companies to my knowledge who are working on more stabilized glucagon formulation. Some of them are compatible with only some pumps, not the others. And we're talking to them, and the hope is that when we move to long-term studies, so the 6 months or 3 month studies, we will be using one of these glucagon that we envision could be used later on if we push this to the market at some point. Yeah. And we have incidences actually where the current glucagon blocks the pump, so it freezes in the tube. It didn't happen very often, but we had to change the tube, and you can see it crystallized, like you can see it visually. So we don't really envision commercializing with the current available glucagon formulation, just for the clinical trials. Yes, please.
When you show the graph that have the hours in range of the 3 different conventional, one hormone, 2 hormone pumps, with the conventional pump therapy, were you using the CGM?
No. Well, some studies yes, some studies no. So the CAMP study, they had CGM, but it wasn't overnight. So they had the CGM at night, and then the doctor in the morning will download the data, will look at it, and they make adjustment for the next night. Now, in the 24-hour studies, they didn't have CGM. They had it, but was blinded. So if they wanted to measure their sugar level, they would measure it with the meter. And the reason we did this is that not everyone is comfortable with using a sensor. So some of the patients were more familiar with using the sensor than others. And it becomes much harder for us to recruit people, because if you bring someone who is unfamiliar with the sensor, you have to train them for like few weeks, and you try to set all the alarms for them properly just for them to come one day extra at the end, and we have some budget constraints, so we just decided to make it simpler. But I agree that the best comparison should be against a sensor augmented pump therapy. So in all our outpatient studies, so 60-hour studies, people do have sensor and they can use it freely, because this is really what you want to compare. You want to compare against the best available therapy. You cannot compare against something that is not the best. Yeah.
Have you got any idea what are you able to extrapolate what somebody doing injections only?
No. No, we haven't tested any in this. No, I don't have an answer really. We had actually a lot of participants calling us, wanted to participate with injections, but all patients, they need to have an insulin pump for at least 3 months or 6 months, because they need to have stabilized beta rates. So we don't really know how this will translate into injection.
Thank you very much. Any more questions about these patients? Thank you. The crowd loves it.